Okay, let's talk about the planet that influenced the horse and his boy. Did anybody figure it out? Well, let me tell you about Mercury. That's who it is. In old-fashioned thermometers, your mom or dad might remember this, there used to be some mercury in it, which is like quicksilver. It's a strange metal that I don't even know if it's a metal, but if you were to take it out and roll it around, it divides, but it always comes back together again. It always comes back to the center and becomes one thing. That is the metal that's associated with Mercury. He's also the messenger of the gods, very fleet-footed messenger of the gods who runs the messages to the gods. And he's also about language, which is quite interesting because in The Horse and His Boy, there are more times when people with Aslan are just silent. They have nothing to say. They don't need to say anything. They just walk around in silence in a good way. Let me read you what it says about Mercury in the planets, okay? So, Lady Luna, the moon, is the closest one to Earth. Next, beyond her, Mercury marches, madcap rover, patron of pilferers. That's people who sort of steal things, pick things up from people. Pert quicksilver, his gaze begets goblin mineral, merry multitude of meeting selves. Same, but sundered. From the soul's darkness, with wreathed wand, words he marshals, guides and gathers them, gay well-beather of flocking fancies. His flint has struck the spark of speech from spirit's tinder. Lord of language, he leads forever the spangle and splendor. Sport that mingles sound with senses, in subtle pattern, words in wedlock, and a wedding also of thing with thought. So, he's a madcap rover, always on the run, patron of pilferers. Do you remember that every night, or every other night, I guess, Shasta, who became Kor, but Shasta would go into a village and sometimes he would buy things or sometimes they'd have to kind of steal things, but for a reason because they were trying to escape. Merry multitude of meeting selves, same but sundered, like twins who've been separated. And then there's this stuff about language, which is quite interesting, but maybe not as interesting to everybody else who was reading it. Think of all the running that happens in this book. From the first night when Shasta gets on Bree, then the running from the lion, and then the running across the desert, and then the running that Shasta has to do. And it's just the whole, that's so much of what's going on. And he is the messenger, right? He is the messenger to the king who has to run. So if you look for that, you'll see a lot of it. But here's something really, really interesting. Most of the planets are also associated with one of the constellations, right? Like the constellations are like the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, the Bear. I wish I knew more about them. I don't. But the constellation that Mercury goes with is Gemini. Gemini is two twins. And think about in the book, there's at least the twins Kor and Corin, but there's also just all these brothers, Dar and Darin, Kal and Colin. There's all these things that seem to be twins. There's twins, and the twins that are in Gemini are called Castor and Pollux. And this is so crazy because Castor is a great trainer of horses. Now in our book, Kor doesn't actually train the horse trains him, but that's kind of the idea. And Pollux, his twin, is a renowned boxer, a fighter. And do you remember with Corin, he both boxed somebody in Tashbaan who said something not nice about Queen Susan, and then he wanted to box Rabidash at the end. Let me box him, father. And then he boxes the bear up at the top, 33 rounds with no timekeeper, and then he became a very reformed bear. Such a funny little line. That is, that's so amazing that is together there. Oh, there's too many other things to talk about. But that this book is influenced by Mercury, I think for sure. And there's actually one quite interesting thing. Lewis had a very good friend, not Arthur Green. Was it Arthur Green? No, why can't I think of his first name? They did some writing together. They were in a group together that, let me just see if I can find it. He did, oh, phooey. It's on the tip of my tongue. I've forgotten a word for every one of these little videos. Anyway, there is a letter where in 1950, or it might be in his diary, in 1950, he and this friend, oh, it's Roger Lancelin Green. There, I got it. Okay. They planned a story of a trip to Mercury, but they didn't get very far with it. Now, here's the thing. It was about that time that Roger Lancelin Green was reading proofs, like the Lewis's first handwriting thing about the horse and his boy. And Michael Ward, who is the one who came up with this theory about the planets, believes that it was a secretive thing. Lewis didn't talk to people about it. There's hints to it, but he didn't talk about it. And probably the reason that he didn't want to talk about a story about going to Mercury with Roger Lancelin Green at that time was because he was reading the story called The Horse and His Boy, a proof of it, and he didn't want to give away his secret, so he wanted to get them off that topic. Yes. Oh, it's just so great. He wasn't trying to be sneaky. I think that he was having fun with this little plan of his, and he was enjoying it. And it was kind of joyful to him to have this sort of secret that nobody knew about except him, and that nobody really figured out until just a while ago, long after he died, which is interesting because he wrote about the planets a lot. He wrote about it in poetry. He wrote about it in the book, The Discarded Image, that I told you about. He has books, science fiction books for adults that take place on Mars and on Venus. He wrote little stories for sci-fi magazines. In fact, let me show you. Some people don't know that, but let me see if I have them right here. Easy to find. Look at this. Fantasy and science fiction. Damon Knight, Frederick Pohl, C.S. Lewis. He wrote sci-fi. He has something in here too, even though his name isn't on the front, but I'll show you. This was something that he was very interested in and cared about. Look at the very first one that's listed there. Ministering Angels by C.S. Lewis. So, how cool is that? Come on. That's so great. So, Mercury. Now there's only 2 planets left. Venus and Saturn. And we have 2 books left. So it should be pretty easy, I think, probably to figure out which one is which if you just find out a little bit about Venus and a little bit about Saturn. But we'll see. So the next book that we're going to read is The Magician's Nephew, which some people say is supposed to be book 1, but it's clearly supposed to be book 6. And that's how he always talked about it in his letters to people. He always said, there's going to be 7 books in all. The 6th book will go right back to the beginning and tell you how there came to be that lamppost in that world. So that's when we read it. All right. So next up is The Magician's Nephew. I cannot wait because it's one of my favorite books ever and has some of my favorite characters in it ever, like they all do.